Hi, in today's video I'll be doing a vintage dress refashion where I'll show you how to add lining to an already finished garment. Also, I'll be showing you how to add a little flare to an A-line dress with a ruffled hem. So stay tuned. As you can see here, the dress is completely unlined. And before we get started, be forewarned that there's a lot of pinning involved. As I'm sure you already know, the front will become the back, so for the back, I first remove the insert, and in the front, I remove the tag. Afterwards, I turned the raw edge under twice and finished with a straight stitch. To lower the neck, I first tried it on and pinned it where I wanted it to sit, then cut, leaving allowance. I left a part of the neck intact to avoid opening the shoulder seams. Then, like the back, I turned it under twice and sew. So I went ahead and folded the dress in half, pinning the waist so it stays together. From there, I placed a pin roughly where I wanted the length of the dress and another where the ruffles would be attached. To make sure I had enough to play with, I cut between the pins, leaving a few extra inches on both sides. Now, to get the ruffled hem even all around, I started by pinning along the bottom to keep it together. Once it was all pinned, I measured and marked 8 inches all around. I then added more pins to keep the fabric from shifting while cutting. Afterwards, I turned under the raw edge twice and sew. Next, I made 2 rows of basting stitch, starting a ½ inch from the top. Now, grabbing hold of the bobbin threads, I gathered the fabric. By the way, as you see here, I used a contrasting thread for the basting stitch, so they are visible to remove later on. Before attaching the gathers to the dress, I shifted my focus to the lining. Here's the lining I chose, which really complements the color of the dress. With the dress still folded in half and the bottom pinned, I placed it onto the lining with the folds together. Starting with the lower half, I needed to get the proper width of the waist. To do that, I stretched it out all the way and placed a pin to mark the spot. From there, I cut, leaving a ½ inch allowance at the hem and approximately 1.5 inches on the side. With linings, you always want to cut it slightly bigger. Next, I used a couple pins to mark the waistline on the lining, then cut a slight curve using the pins as a guide. I cut 2, so I had one for the front and one for the back. Moving on to the top half, like the bottom, I pinned it onto the lining along the fold. I didn't need to line the neck, so I placed it a couple inches away and pinned it to secure it in place. Again, I stretched the waist and placed a pin to mark the true waist. To find the outline of the top, I rolled the skirt and sleeve up and out of the way, then cut the lining slightly bigger. For the top, I also cut 2. Now it was time to join all the pieces. I started by joining one of the top and bottom halves. Then with right sides together, I pinned the back panel to the front, starting from the hem and working my way up. After sewing, I serged the back waist, hem, and sides. I decided on a v-neck for the lining with straps, so after draping it over the dress with wrong sides and waist together, I used pins to outline the neckline. After that, I carefully cut around the neckline, leaving a 1/2 inch allowance. I went ahead and did the same to the other top piece, then pinned them together. Before sewing, I also whipped up a couple straps and placed them at the points on the neck. Next, I quickly clipped all the corners, then fold over the second piece to reveal the straps. Afterwards, I ran a top stitch a 1/4 inch from the neck to prevent the seam from rolling. And lastly, for the lining, I serged the top pieces together at the sides and waist to treat them as one. Now before I attach it to the dress, I first wanted to finish the hem. I started by pinning the seams together, then continued pinning all around. Once I did that, I secured it with a basting stitch by hand, then sewed between the gathering threads to finish. For the final step, I first attached the lining at the waist with the seam allowances together. In the back, I folded under the allowance, then pinned it above the elastic to conceal the band. Of course, I didn't need to do this in the front since the top already covered it. Here's a better view of the waist, which makes it easier to sew. Speaking of easier, I divided the waist into 4 sections, stretching and sewing each as I go along. Okay, so as you can see here, I used a small zigzag stitch and sewed along the edge. At this point, all that was left was to sew the sides, following the dress seams, then attach the straps. Oh, and remove the basting threads. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you like refashions, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Here's an added bonus in case you're wondering what it looks like reversed. Bye now.